We are live then, and with a panel of brilliant thinkers who are going to drop wisdom for you for the next 45 minutes. Hi, everybody. I'm Lindsay Siegel, head of impact for Company Ventures, which is a venture capital firm based in New York, where we work with our founders to help them establish their vision, mission, values, like right from the beginning, and have conversations about stakeholder accountability as part of that. And we go deep on diversity, equity, and inclusion and how you build your hiring practices and your culture and your product with DEI kind of front and center. But we are joined for this conversation to talk about the fundraising process for early stage startups and the importance of finding those mission-aligned investors and how to navigate. So just personally want to say I'm so excited to be part of this dialogue and that this event exists. Thank you to our organizers, because it's just so cool to have conversations with an array of startups and investors about the importance of values-aligned work and the power of that. So I'm going to ask our panelists to introduce themselves quickly so you guys can kind of help us lay the foundation here. So let's go in the order of Ope, Claire, and Gabe. Can you all say just a few words about your story and what you are doing today?
Yes. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Such a pleasure to be here. My name is Ope Bukola. I am the founder of Kibo School. We are building an online university to provide affordable education to students in Africa. My background is in trying to build technology to make education accessible. So I've spent many years at different ed tech companies, most recently at Google, where I worked on Google Classroom. And I'm excited to be here because I've always seen tech as a force for good. For me, education has been the primary application, but I believe that if you combine technology and entrepreneurship, you can do really well as a founder, and also do good for the world. And so really embedding that into our building from the first stage is important to me as a founder. So excited to talk to all of you.
Thanks, Ope. So I'm Claire Shorall, and I'm the founder and CEO of TopKnot. So TopKnot's a peer coaching system. The idea is coaching super powerful and really just way too expensive for the average person. So we bring that downstream through technology and peer groups. Before that, I was in public education. So I've been a teacher for 11 years, did that all the way through my career, but also ran district programs and made the elusive jump between public education and VC. So now I'm on the other side of the table, so that's fun. TopKnot has been around since February of 2020, which was a chef's kiss time to start a company. I'm just super excited to talk about how we think about things and our fundraising journey and just the interesting intersection between having been on both sides of the table and just like how that makes me think about the world.
Hey everyone, my name is Gabe Kleinman. I run portfolio services and marketing at Obvious Ventures. A little bit about Obvious. Obvious is a venture capital firm that backs purpose-driven founders reimagining trillion-dollar sectors. And we believe those types of companies will outperform their peers. When Obvious was founded 7 or 8 years ago, this was not a commonly held belief in the venture community, and we're excited that over that time that a number of people have come around to that idea. And so under this unifying thesis, we back founders in categories that are basically the building blocks of society: food, transportation, housing, healthcare. So backing founders and companies like Beyond Meat, reimagining our food system, Proterra and Lilium, electrifying our transportation systems, and companies like that. And I'm excited to be here. So thanks for showing up.
Thanks so much, everybody. And just to set the stage here, it looks like we have about 20 or so people online and the whole room full of people at BetaWorks is my understanding. So hello to everybody, virtual and in person together. Excited to have this conversation with all of you. We're going to spend about 25 minutes or so just in conversation amongst the four of us, but then we'll open this up for Q&A from all those audiences. So please have your questions brewing in your heads and get ready to bring them to our panelists in just a few minutes. But let's jump in. It's so cool to have this discussion with you guys. So from our previous conversation, Claire and Ope, you guys are in a pretty similar stage of fundraising, where you have both already raised your pre-seed and are about to embark on the process of raising your seed round, correct?
Yep.
Correct.
So let's talk first about that fundraising process for your pre-seed. Yeah. So as each of you went and approached, the necessity of bringing in some funds to get started, how did you think about who you were going to bring to the table, and how did you navigate some of the conversations that happen in those earliest days that connect those investors to the purpose of your company and the mission of your company? Claire, can we maybe start with you on that question?
Yeah. Well, just to set the scene, so we raised close to $700,000 in the fall of 2020 years. And that was designed for us to have enough to get some early people on board, build out the product, test these things. And candidly, I also made sure that Brooke, my co-founder, and I were building something that was exciting us, that we wanted to work on for the next 10 years. So we were purposely not trying to raise a huge amount from the beginning. We wanted to be a little bit resource constrained, but also have enough to actually do things and build things and see things through. I get asked questions a lot about our pre-seed round, and I think the most important mindset shift for me, having come from VC, is that fundraising is fundamentally a search task and it's not a sales task. I think people go out being let me try to convince somebody that I'm doing the next big thing. But we really went out with this idea that we had this, we were an energetic beacon, and we saw the world in a way that women had, our peer coaching platform is primarily for women, but women should have access to choice and agency and be able to craft their life however they see fit. And people were really drawn to that message, drawn to that idea. And so I think what ended up happening in our early round was we were a really awesome team. We have this really big vision. There were several funds that were really interested, and many of them are sort of people who are out in the world who are really focused on equity and access, but also people who are, traditional VCs who all, as a part of their personal life, have done a lot to send the elevator back down. So our cap table reflects both who we wanted as users. We are over 50% women by headcount and by allocation, and particularly, so we're 25%, our angels are 25% Black women and 31% by allocation. So that was really critical to us. But also, you find allies in places that you may or may not expect. You tell your story and some people's eyes light up, and we just, we kept emailing, we kept those conversations going. There were people who I think might have been good for us, sort of classically, but you just didn't see the same spark. And so, yeah, I think that values alignment, is one part of feel, but also another part, just the energy that you're bringing to this, and people want to see TopKnot exist in the world. So we have 5 funds: Backstage, Homebrew, Uprising, Base, and I'm going to do the embarrassing thing of, oh my God, I'll come back to that. And then a whole bunch of really awesome angels who are mostly operators, and just people who are into it, and people who really want to see us win.
That's I love that perspective of this is a search, right, and not a sales process, and you're an energetic beacon. Ope, how about you? How did you navigate raising your pre-seed?
Yeah, I think, I can echo so much of what Claire has said. So we raised our pre-seed earlier this year, closed in June, and about $450K. And when we began, I think, in terms of what we wanted to do with the capital, we knew we wanted to bring on some folks, and we also wanted to really put the product out there. And our product is an education product, right? getting learners in various African countries to take online classes, really build strong community around it. So it was really important to find people who understood the opportunity in Africa, right? So when I tell people what I'm working on, it's often like, wait, where? Like, what's the internet situation? You get all of these questions, which can be sometimes, it's what you have to do always as a founder is to educate people. But I certainly felt like I was doing a ton of education. Like, there's so many young people in Africa. It's like the largest youth population. This is a massive opportunity. So all of those things. So as I approached it, I think it was really trying to find people who were excited about the opportunity of Africa, people who didn't look at Africa, unfortunately, it's primarily seen through the lens of like charity, right? And not a place that can actually be good for business. And so wanting people who just had the right mindset about what we were building, weren't like looking down on the continent or our customers, like that's not who we're going for. So that was really important philosophically. And I knew that there are a ton of people in the diaspora like myself. I was an example of this, who had been born in Africa, spent a lot of our lives there, and wanted a way to give back. So our cap table is more than half like tech professionals in the African diaspora. Like, they really get it, right? They're like, oh yeah, you're building something for my cousins, my nephews, like my people back home. So that's how we approached it, was trying to find really mission aligned angels. We also have Brooklyn Bridge Ventures based in New York on the cap table. And that's a fund that I've known for a long time. I've had a good relationship with, someone who really cares about playing the long game. Like, we're in education, and you can build big businesses in education, but it's also an area where you have to be really sensitive to what a huge part of people's lives it is, right? For a lot of our customers, it's the biggest buying decision they've made up until that point in their life, and it matters a lot. So finding investors and people who get that and aren't necessarily like, we need you to blitz scale through someone's education, right? So I think finding people, whether angels who are mission aligned or funds, that I could be really honest and have that conversation. Like, we're going to play the long game here. So if you're in for the long game, let's do it, because we've got to stick to these principles.
Mm-hmm. So interesting. I want to get into the conversation in a few minutes of like how this shifts as you look to raise the next round, because it's a really powerful stance to not have to educate the people who are joining you very early on. Like, I'm curious about how you're thinking about that as you go into raising your seed. But the takeaway here of like believing in you and believing in this mission, right, and feeling just like naturally drawn to what you're doing feels so important for finding that alignment for super early round of fundraising. Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah.
So. Yeah. Gabe, on the other side of the table, I know you are not typically looking at pre-seed investments. Obvious makes much larger investment later stage. But I think I would love to hear your perspective, and I think this crowd would too, of like, why is it that VCs are coming to the table now to dive into this world of ESG focused investing? What do you see as like changing at a macro level that's affecting the conversation that VCs are interested in having with startups, with founders?
So if I can just make one comment on both what Ope and Claire were saying about their processes first, because it does relate to what this moment in time is. Because this is a different moment in time. As a friend of mine has said, we are all new to this moment in the world. And I heard, search not sales, educate yourself from both of you. And I would, turn that back on the entrepreneur. You don't want to be in the business of educating the venture investor, but you want to be in the business of having them educate you about what kind of investor they would be. I mean, this is a time where startup founders have more power than they have before because cash is everywhere. And I'm not suggesting in any way that fundraising is a walk in the park and that you're just walking up and down Sand Hill Road or Fifth Avenue with suitcases of cash open. But you do have more power. And so I would reframe a little bit, and especially Claire, your point about search, not sales, conducted a little bit like an interview. And this gets back, Lindsay, to your question of why is this moment different from an ESG standpoint? To clarify, and I've had some conversations with Johannes Leonard about this out of the UK, who is very focused on ESG work in venture. Being an impact-focused fund, and we consider ourselves to be a straight-up venture capital firm. We seek alpha returns for our limited partners. We believe that companies that are purpose-driven, that do harness technology more responsibly, not only will they resonate more deeply with consumers and with the business trade, but they'll also mitigate a number of risks, environmental, social, and governance in the ESG. And so I think the reason why you have more investors talking about this as something that's important, and when I say this, I can't even clarify what this is. I think it's because they recognize that the tide is turning in the world, that the most talented employees want to work at companies that are harnessing technology responsibly, that are solving actual problems in the world that we are all facing together. They recognize it as a competitive advantage. And so that's why you're seeing this massive rise in funds, no pun intended, with TPG Rise, with Bain Double Impact, with a lot of what DBL has done in the past, and with what firms like 50 Years are doing now. They see this as a competitive advantage.
Gabe, let's stay there in this place where the entrepreneurs hold some power that is sort of previously untapped, maybe in the fundraising process. What is your advice then? Any specific advice to founders to evaluate whether or not that investor is going to be a good fit and kind of mission aligned with them? How would they know?
I'd say there are probably three things that any sort of startup founder could probe on. One is to ask them what they stand for and what their purpose is. I mean, they're asking you, so it's quite fair for you to turn the table back on them and ask them. And they may just be about making as much money as possible, and that's okay. And that, they are fiduciaries. We are fiduciaries to our limited partners, and so we are legally obligated to do this. But it's a fair question to ask them. The second I would do is to ask respectfully about their process. And we talked about this on our pre-call, which is, what are these investors looking for and how are they making these decisions? I would ask about their process and how they go about making decisions. And then the last is really diving into the ways that they would be working with you on a really tactical level, and whether or not you see that as strategic value to your company. Value add, portfolio services, kind of you name it, that type of activity at a venture firm, it's relatively new. Andreessen kind of created this services on steroids model that so many other venture firms have now looked up and said, oh, we can't go to market unless we have some type of value add. But you also have iconic firms like Benchmark and Founders Fund that they offer nothing, and that's done intentionally. I would, though, again, special moment in time, I would ask, if I were a startup founder, how do you work with your portfolio and like really diving in instead of getting like the sizzle reel, and then when the rubber hits the road, when you sign the term sheet, it doesn't turn out to be that way.
Yep. And these are great points, and some of those answers will be straightforward, but you've also said before, like, also look at the questions that they're asking you as a founder and read between the lines a little bit too. The importance of that intuition. I'm curious, Ope, from your perspective, as you go out to raise your next round, you know, what Gabe is saying is the ball is in your court in this special moment in time. That's got to feel good, but tell us, like, what are you looking for and how are you going to approach finding investors where at this point, like, that mission alignment is even more critical?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll take it. Like the ball, nice to feel like the ball is in our court for sure. But I think Gabe kind of, you know, hit the nail on the head. It's interesting, right? Because people always want to know, why are you as a founder doing this startup, right? Like, what's the founder product fit there? And as I think about raising the seed, almost turn that question around to the investors, or, you know, like, what is like your company product fit, right? Like, why is Kibo interesting for like what you're trying to accomplish as a firm? So really asking those questions, and, you know, thank you, Gabe, for reiterating. Like, it's hard when going back to that mindset, right? When you're like, we're doing this search, it can be really hard as a founder to remember that. Like, we want people who are going to stay with us for a long time. So trying to really understand for them, like, why Kibo, where do we fit in the portfolio that they're building? You know, is it because you're interested in getting into a new market? Is it because there's something fundamentally about education that you believe? Is it who the founders look like? But teasing those out, those are questions that are really top of mind. And then, yeah, that second thing goes into really trying to find firms who haven't necessarily experienced in education, but similar areas like education, healthcare, areas that involve where you're going out to the consumer, but there's also this kind of large regulatory environment around it. There's a lot of sensitivity in the market around it, and people who can help us navigate that thoughtfully, right? Like, we're trying to build something that will be large and scalable in markets that are sensitive. So we're really focused on finding investors who either have experience doing that, perhaps they have operators on their team or in their network who've done that, or can connect us to people who do that well. Because for me, you know, worst case scenario, like, I'm not going to name names of companies, but for-profit education does not have a good reputation, so to speak. So, you know, I want to make sure that in 5-10 years, like, we're all still really proud of what we've built, and we're seen as, yes, doing really well, but also doing really good. And I want partners who believe that too.
Beautiful. I love this concept of ensuring that their expertise matches in some important ways to what you are building, even if it's not directly with this product. But the combination of, like, understanding why they'd be interested in the product plus bringing their expertise to the table is a good 1-2 punch, you know, in terms of that filter of, will we get along here? Claire, what about you? What are your thoughts as you go into your seed fundraising round?
Yeah, well, I'm struck by this, like, pride in what you built with this, like, interesting new moment that we're all kind of in together. I think it's important, you know, to consider the other forms of capital besides just venture, particularly when you're getting into into ESG type work. That was like a very critical conversation that we had. And we have explicitly decided that we want to go for venture scale and do this work in that modality. So, like, when I hear obvious is like, it's a fiduciary, it's venture, like, it is traditional in those ways, but also then I think the onus is kind of more on the humans in the system to, like, share their values. And so, like, that, when I think about who I'd want to partner with in a seed, it's like really good people who are going to hold the line of like pushing us in the traditional ways to be the massive scale that we envision TopKnot being, because, like, that is the mode in which we've had tons of thoughtful conversations. We have pillars of equity, intentionality, and growth. So like nothing is random for us. Like we're not going after it because it's like the hot thing or like, 1,000 Twitter likes or whatever the case may be. Like we see the impact of TopKnot most realized if it is a venture-backed company. And for us, like that means like who the humans are who are with us matters immensely. Mm-hmm. But I appreciate this thing that it's like, it's not just that somebody has like different portfolio services or what, like people can have that infrastructure and you may or may not have access to it, or like they're not particularly patient partners, or there's like a hyper concentration in whatever the hot thing is. And like, you might not be the hot thing of the moment, right? Like, so yeah, I guess I really appreciate when you can meet multiple people at a fund and like there's a heartbeat across like what everybody is saying. People seem happy. Like there's sort of a basic that is like a distinctly human venture. And so we need people who are like distinctly human. I love talking to principals because I was one, and we're like focused on growth and like personal and professional development. Like I want to see that person's being invested in, that they like feel like they can make decisions. Like there are little things that just like show me values more than people can tell me what they bring to the table.
But Claire, you also bring up this important point that like you have to make the decision that venture is the right.
Oh yeah, yeah. I think it's a fascinating and under-discussed conversation.
Yeah, I mean, Gabe, you've talked about it too. Of just like there's a lot of different ways of getting the capital you need in order to build the business. So make sure that your model aligns with how you are fundraising to begin with. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. There are a number of ways to get a company off the ground. And whether it's a friend or someone who comes to me, and to be clear, I am not on the investment team. I am in our investment meetings, and I have a number of entrepreneurs who come to me who I speak with. And I always ask them that question. And Claire, it's a great question, is why venture? You are giving up ownership in your company to somebody else who is they themselves are beholden to somebody else. So it's a great question to ask. Do you need the money? And oftentimes it's great to get it off the ground. But if you are in it for the long game and you see a path for yourself to bootstrap it, maybe you find that it is more, you find different priorities on your product roadmap, or you find ways to get more profitable more quickly so that you don't have to continue to seed power in economics and control, because that's what it's all about, economics and control, to a venture partner. At the same time, though, if you find that firm with happy people, with the heartbeat across...
It exists.
Right? It does exist.
Yeah.
It exists. And it's exciting when it happens and you find the right partner, the right values-aligned partner for you on this journey. That's magical. That's just great for everybody.
Yeah.
I have one last question, and then we're going to open it up to questions from the audience. So everybody online and in person, get your questions ready for our panel here. We've talked a lot to the entrepreneurs in the room. Gabe, I want your attention for 1 sec to the investors. So we, read every day about the ways in which technology is evil and the ways in which founders have led us astray. What is your perspective, or what anything that you would want to share with the investment community of what's the investor role in that conversation?
I think this is really about getting back to the basics and the fundamental of what venture is. I mean, venture is an abbreviation for adventure. It was nicknamed adventure. It was adventure capital. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the leading philanthropists of the 20th century, they had simultaneously spun up these adventure capital initiatives to take risks on really big, high impact ideas that banks would not lend to, or that the public sector would not back either. And so I think this is about getting back to our roots as an industry, which if you do look even at the modern instantiation of this with people like Arthur Rock and others in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, they were backing these transformative companies, and they were particularly looking for founders who were going to make a dent in the world. And they've got a process. And so I would say, I heard the word, I think Ope used the word blitzscaling earlier. And, that was the term of the day. I worked at Medium before Obvious, and during those times we were looking around us, and every other company is all about blitzscaling and hypergrowth. And that was a drift away, I believe, from the basics of venture investing and where you evaluate. You evaluate on the team, the tech, the addressable market, and then the timing of what they're doing. I mean, those are the basics, no matter really where you go. But it's really about, for venture investors, it's about looking at the entrepreneur. We talked about this a little bit previously as well. One short story, how do venture investors evaluate a team? And one of our entrepreneurs, Iman Abu Zaid, who is the co-founder and CEO of Incredible Health, it's a platform that helps healthcare professionals find and do their best work, where the hospital systems apply to the talent rather than the other way around. She was an MD by training. She got her MBA, and she worked in product management at a medical device company, but she had no experience being a CEO. And so people ask us now, it's like, why did you back her back then? She had extraordinary education. She had good tech experience, but really, when she was going through her program at NFX, she had to identify a problem. Their initial platform didn't work, and so they pivoted halfway through, like an 8-week program. She got steeped in this problem with her co-founder, Rome Portlock. Both of them, they have relatives who are nurses and doctors, and they understood and felt this pain point, and they were truly mission-driven to get behind healthcare professionals. And it was their deep radical empathy and their laser focus on this serious and real problem, an ability to adapt and build and grow, that got us so excited to lead her seed. And she's now on Forbes, Incredible is now on Forbes's list of the next $1 billion companies. And if you just Google her name, she's everywhere. So venture investors need to get back to the basics. That's what I'd say.
Love it. It's so, it can be human, right? Like valuing radical empathy and lived experience, like that is human,
Yes.
as compared to let's look at our growth metrics and get excited there.
Yeah, if you focus on the North Star and what really matters, the rest will often follow.
Thanks for that, Gabe. Okay, so we have a question from our online audience, but I want to also invite those at BetaWorks to organize and get your questions together too. I'm sure our hosts over there will help me navigate that. But let me raise up this question from Hayes Witt, who's the co-founder of Driver's Seat Cooperative. I'm going to read it out so everyone can see. And Claire, I think I would love your thoughts on this first if you have a response on this. So what kinds of guardrails do you build into your investment agreement to ensure that the alignment that you've found with a specific partner endures even if that individual partner leaves, i.e. there's a firm level commitment around those values? What do you think?
Yeah, I'm going to have to give thoughts and just like the way that I think about this. I would also say generally, I'm not one to think that if something's on paper that it's ironclad. So thinking about how the investor agreement is written is less about how I would go about it. there's something as a CEO, it's kind of terrifying that people tell me, which is that the company ultimately is the reflection of the CEO. Like you can see the CEO's tendrils, like even as it grows, it's still there. And I sort of feel the same way about funds, like whoever the initial like GPs or managing directors are, like their values permeate downward. And so I think this is to the point of like talking to multiple people and vetting sort of the ecosystem of the fund as opposed to the one person. Like you can be really excited about that one person, but that one person has agency and can move. I would be excited or look to be excited about just sort of the ethos and the way that people from the fund move in the world, such that like if you were handed off from the ideal partner to another, that you fundamentally felt comfortable with the way that fund shows up. But the question specifically around the guardrails, I guess my initial thought would be like I wouldn't necessarily put them in because I would want to be comfortable with the whole fam.
Yeah.
The investor at the table is never going to be an individual, right?
Yeah. I mean, there are definitely some individuals, though, that I find myself just being captivated by. And like, there hasn't been an opportunity yet where I think we've like fallen in the trap of like, oh my God, but this one person's going to be so unlocking. But I think having somebody to check you on that it's never just about the one person. It's about the ecosystem and about like the generalized care, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
I think to add to that, another way to think about that potentially could be, it may be hard to put those guardrails into your investor agreement, but how can you build it into your company itself? So whether that's looking at something like being a public benefit corporation where you're really explicitly stating it in your company's foundation that this is what we exist for, and they're signing on to that. That might be a way that you can do it more formally in writing.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good point.
Davida in the last session specifically said she wished she had registered as a PBC even earlier on because it forces this conversation and alignment like without question, right? There's high guardrails that you build that way.
Yeah, and I'll add to that the question of corporate governance and PBCs. Back to the first question of how is this moment in time different? That used to be seen as a very much a strategic disadvantage or a threat or something scary to investors. And now that you have you have over 10 PBCs that have gone public as PBCs, and you see a lot of M&A activity with companies with that structure, those barriers have come down. So don't feel like that would be a threat to getting investment.
I mean, to be very transparent, women-led teams get 2% of venture capital funding. We had talked about being a PBC from the beginning, and we're like, so many things about our deal are not vanilla. Like, can we just actually do some like very standard stuff as far as how we've incorporated? I mean, like the most standard plain, even down to like just using like very standard post money safes with like outside letters, like what to just like uncomplicate everything else, because just raising in and of itself is more complicated for women, let alone women of color or without like the privileged network that I was walking in. So it was a conversation we had, and we were just like, that is like one hurdle that I don't want to explain every single time. That might be something that we change, right? Because to Gabe's point, it's becoming more commonplace. And I don't love that we had fear about that, and I don't love that we were like compromising in that way, but it was just a reality. Like, this is going to be a conversation every single time. Is that the conversation that we want to be having?
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. And, we chose to be a PBC, and as we're starting to have the conversations, it has come up. But going back to Gabe's point on like checking the questions people ask you, that's also an interesting, how is that phrased and in what spirit, right? That can be an important vetting mechanism if you choose to go that route.
Great. You've raised something here too that I think is important to call out, in that both Ope and Claire, you both have what I assume are pretty extraordinary networks. And the process of fundraising your pre-seed, you probably had pretty strong relationships to to go down that road. But I think so much of what has been discussed here is highly valuable for entrepreneurs, whether or not they're in a starting place that feels pretty well networked in the world that they want to be in or not. It's that still you're looking for those who get you and your vision, right? Who will align with what you are trying to build, and you're looking for a match, and never that sales process of, of maybe forcing somebody who does not fully get it to come sit at the table with you.
Can I do a quick ad / shout out? I think a lot of the people who are most values aligned, explicitly have non-worm intro, either policies or ways in which that you can get into the door. And Mitch and Frida Kapor have been mentors of mine for a decade plus, and I still had to fill out their form. I love the fact that there are just people who are out in the world who are explicit about the ways in which their actions show up and mirror the things that they're saying. And I give, they're incredible in that way. But I do think that a marker of funds that are largely interested in this type of work is that they think about the ways in which networks disadvantage certain entrepreneurs, and find ways to mitigate that impact.
Love it. Can I toss us over to the folks at BetaWorks? Are there any questions from those in the room and in person? Not at the moment. We have a bunch more coming in virtually. Should I turn to those?
But we have a question in the room. Michael, do you want to?
Yes. Okay.
Great.
I was actually just putting it in the chat. Let's see. So I'm just curious. I'll read what I stuck in the chat, as you can too. Just curious how VCs in particular and investors in general look at PBCs as a portion of funds, or how they can go into them if their fiduciary responsibility, as Gabe was saying, is to maximize the return for their LPs. Can they afford to, when they're looking at two different things, go for one that has the handicap of stakeholders other than their investors, as opposed to one that's going hyper growth? And that just seems like something we run into all the time. I'll hear you talk to it.
Thanks,
right,
Michael. Gabe, before you jump in, just want to raise up, there's a similar question that's in our chat from Betsy Schmidt, CEO of Mesh, asking also the ratio of PBCs to C Corps or S Corps at Obvious. So I think these questions fit together.
Great. So let me caveat this by saying I am not a lawyer. I am pretty steeped in these structures and these processes because I am the ESG lead at Obvious. I led our B Corp certification process. And we've worked with people and this is who I would suggest speaking with, someone like Suze McCormick at Morrison Foster, who is really the guru of corporate structure and especially PBCs, Delaware C Corps, and the alphabet soup that you get into there. So as far as I understand, Delaware C Corps are not structured where their sole responsibility is to return capital to their investors. So I don't think there's a diametrically opposed goal set necessarily. Are there competing interests? Yes. But this may come back to finding values-aligned investors, if you're an entrepreneur, who understand that by looking out for a multitude of stakeholders, that you increase your chances of delivering greater longer-term value than if you focus exclusively on one group or one constituency. When it comes to what we suggest to our portfolio or our portfolio construction and their legal status, we don't mandate anything. We published something about 5 years ago. James Joaquin, who is co-founder and MD at Obvious, published something called the World Positive Term Sheet. Most term sheets are about economics and control. Actually, that's all they're about. We were suggesting a rider that would incorporate values, legal structure, commitment to DE&I initiatives as a way to do that. And that helps founders think earlier on, as well as about these issues, and then align more closely with the investor on them earlier on. In terms of our actual portfolio construction, I think we do have a disproportionate number of B Corps in the portfolio. We have a lot of consumer companies because that good housekeeping seal of approval works better from a public-facing standpoint for consumer-driven companies than it would for a B2B company. But we do have an increasing number of PBCs, and we have PBCs that have exited. One that went public this year, one that got acquired this year. So we're just plowing ahead.
Thanks, Gabe. Thanks for the question, Michael.
Sure.
We are now officially over time. So let me go a quick rapid fire round to each of our panelists. One final, Jewel, drop us one final piece of wisdom for the entrepreneurs in the room who are looking to find mission-aligned investors. Ope, you want to go first? You look like you got something on the tip of your tongue.
Sure. It is about finding your people and believing that they're out there. So there's a lot of money out there. Don't settle.
Beautiful. Thank you. Claire?
So I referenced our pillars previously, but we probably spent 100 hours at the inception of TopKnot just establishing what mattered to us and who we wanted to be in the world, like not just a vision and mission statement, but really like what we're going to be the foundation of every decision and every action we made. And I think that it's hard to find your people or people who are values aligned if you haven't done the work to articulate that for yourself. So spend the time up front because it pays immense dividends. Pun intended, I guess, on the back end.
Awesome, Claire. Thank you. Gabe?
And this is really echoing a lot of what Ope and Claire have said. I would similarly try to do some diligence on the firms that you are going to pitch, from people who have worked with them in the past to how they talk about what they do in service of what in public forums. And I would have open and honest conversations with investors about that when you go in.
Yeah.
Awesome. Here, I'm dropping these 3 little nuggets in the chat because really they were brilliant. Thank you so much to our panelists for being so open and thoughtful in your experience. So appreciate you all. And it's been a pleasure getting to know you guys through this. For all of our participants, I am to give you instructions that those online can now join Sam Brown's Ethical Risk Workshop. So I'm sure you do that from the main room of Run the World. And those in person can go downstairs at BetaWorks and join Lyle in a similar workshop. So thanks, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I will look forward to seeing you all online later. Take care. Thank you.
Thank you.